All life depends on the rivers and wetlands and lakes of the arid West. The Colorado River is perhaps the hardest working river we have in North America. It's depended on by some 40 million people for millions of acres of irrigated agriculture, hydropower.
What happens with the Colorado River is a really big deal. The eyes of the world are upon us.
We no longer have reserves to rely on.
Imagine having a cup of water sitting high on a shelf. You see it. It glistens in the light, but you can't get to it. You can't use it. You can't drink it.
The flexibility in the system is gone.
This river will disappear.
In fact, what's going to happen here is everybody's going to get to lose, and hopefully we can come up with an equitable way so we share the losses, we share the shortages.
Right about the signing of the Colorado River Compact in 1922, so exactly 100 years ago, and I have it all bound up in the law of the river here that I carry with me almost wherever I go these days. We thought that we had about a 21 million acre foot river to deal with in terms of volume. We now know that we're dealing with about half that amount.
The 1922 Colorado River Compact was the first effort of its kind to bring people from different states together, one negotiator and one engineer from each state. They set up a very clear framework that if there was going to be conversations about major federal activity in creating infrastructure on the Colorado River, there'd better be an agreement. So the 7 basin states sent their 2 people each, and they were to reach an agreement on how to allocate the water of the Colorado River. They were to do that because tensions were notable. They were deadlocked, and they met and they reached a compromise. And that worked for decades. Is it going to work anymore? That's the cliff edge of the present.
The negotiators came up with numbers for river flow that were in excess than what we saw in the 20th century and now are greatly in excess of what we're seeing in the 21st century.
And we didn't build our infrastructure around a 9 to 11 million acre foot river. We built our infrastructure to handle a river twice that size.
Was it flawless? It was not flawless.
The tribes were left out of the 1922 Colorado River Compact.
Initially, Mexico's right to water was overlooked. Tribes' rights to water were overlooked. And frankly, the environment was basically not even thought about. This hardworking river has been overallocated, arguably overdeveloped, and certainly now that we've entered the millennial drought, which is exacerbated by climate change, we not only don't have flow reaching the sea, but we don't have much water left in our reservoirs.
The 2 largest reservoirs in the nation, Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Those 2 reservoirs not only produce water storage capability for the basin to kind of get you through a dry year or pattern of years, it also provides hydroelectric power that is clean and, in a sense, renewable for the basin.
The way a reservoir is built is there's typically some kind of depression in the earth or a canyon and a big plug of concrete at the downstream end. And that big plug of concrete has intakes in it where water is going to move through. In the case of the big Colorado River dams, there are turbines in the dams so that the water can create hydropower as it moves through. Those intakes are not at the toe of the dam. They're not at ground level. They are midway up the face of the dam.
And if you go below the intake for the powerhouse, you can't generate a single electron of energy.
There is still water behind the dam, but it can't pass through the dam, and they call that level dead pool.
Dead pool.
Dead pool is actually where you can't get any water out of the reservoir.
Glen Canyon Dam is a black start unit for the Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station. the largest nuclear plant in the country. And hydropower is one of those resources in Glen Canyon that is available to bring back units from a black start. But for that additional hydropower, the resource situation in the West is going to be very, very tight. And when resources are in short supply, prices are going to be very high.
Lake Powell currently sits at 23% of its capacity, and Lake Mead is around 27% of its capacity.
We've actually had decent winter snowpacks, followed by really dry and hot summers.
In a phrase, it's climate change.
The snow would melt in April, and it would melt off through July, and then the flow would decline in July, August, September. We always thought that those summer rains didn't really do much because the flow just seemed to go down no matter what. But what we now know is that those summer rains kept the soil moisture high enough to, one, prevent fires, but two, to prevent what we've seen happening in the following spring. So it dries out in the summer. Those soils stay dry through the winter. When the snow goes to melt, instead of running overland to rivers and creeks, that meltwater sinks into the soil. That's how you get a 50% runoff out of a 100% snowpack. Work that I have done with Jonathan Overpeck suggests we could see another 10% decline in the next 20 years, so 30% decline. Other scientists out of the USGS suggest the decline by mid-century could be up to 40% of the 20th century annual flow.
And the possibility that the river may not be able to flow perennially downstream from those giant dams, Glen Canyon Dam and Hoover Dam.
My biggest fear about the Colorado River is not seeing it run in the same healthy way that my ancestors and my elders were able to look upon that riverway.
And that would be a real catastrophe, certainly for the Grand Canyon and everything that lives there, and also for all water users downstream from those reservoirs.
Earlier this year, the Department of Interior announced we needed to find between 2 to 4 million acre-feet in cuts in the Colorado River system to protect the overall system.
The federal government is creating a framework that says, you're going to do this. And if you don't, you're going to pay a price.
Much of that is going to have to come out of ag because ag uses roughly 80% of the water in the basin.
Unfortunately, in this case, I believe that you're going to have winners and losers, and I think the losers are going to be agriculture.
The cities could dry up and go away, and you won't find that amount of water.
Because the law was put in place over a century ago, and because a lot of the heavy-duty infrastructure was put in place in the middle of the 20th century, we find ourselves today in the 21st century with much larger populations.
The fastest growing part of the nation for many decades now has been the southwestern part of the country.
And with 21st century ideas about the values that we want water to sustain in our communities, and somewhat stymied by what we see as inflexible legal regime and infrastructure that was purpose-built that might not be serving us.
All of Western water law is based on first in time, first in right, also known as the doctrine of prior appropriation. And it makes a lot of sense in simplistic areas where you need to allocate a scarce resource with 2 farmers, for example, in the 1800s, or with 2 miners. If there wasn't enough water, the person who came last had to move on and go somewhere else. Unfortunately, we're now finding it kind of fails in the 21st century, where we have these very complicated societal entities, cities and agriculture and mining and industry. And the idea that you can cut off one user and just say, hey, you get nothing, and the person in front of you gets everything, it doesn't work so well.
Everything we do is molded around that doctrine, how it's been applied, court rulings associated with its use. And at least from my perspective, to turn that upside down and start anew would be near impossible.
You know, we can't let Phoenix, with many millions of people, have a second place seat at the table to a few hundred farmers.
If you eat a salad in February, anywhere in the country, New York City, Chicago, Denver, anywhere, 90% of that salad is coming from the Colorado River Basin.
Imperial Valley is like nowhere in the world in terms of its vastness and ability to produce food.
It was all Colorado River silt that was placed there over the millennia. So our valley is very rich in soil. My name's Steve Benson. I'm a farmer in Imperial Valley. Our family farm has been farming since 1932. I'm third generation.
My name is Pat O'Toole. We're ranchers in northwest Colorado and southern Wyoming. We raise cattle, sheep, horses, dogs, and children. And I am also currently the president of the board of the Family Farm Alliance. We represent everybody from the Imperial Valley to here. I don't think a country with the best Mediterranean growing in the world can afford to push its farmers out, but that's exactly what's happening.
Ag is an important economic sector within our state. A lot of that's driven by irrigated agriculture, the food produced as well as forage for livestock.
You know, Colorado just did a poll and it showed people overwhelmingly do not want to transfer water from agriculture to growth.
Is it sustainable to keep growing so fast?
Eastern slope of Colorado, LA, Phoenix, Las Vegas. They don't want steady, slow, sustainable growth. They want explosive growth. And every one of those places is now turning down construction because there's not enough water for it. And there's no other place to go than agriculture in rural America.
When you take water out of ag communities, you hurt the whole community. You hurt the supply of labor, you hurt the seed dealer, the tractor dealer, the grocery store.
You know, and you go out to walk through an alfalfa field, not only is it one of the greatest smelling places to be, but you see birds and bats and bees and butterflies, you know, elk, deer, and all the pieces that make biodiversity work.
The forest that surrounds these rivers, that have been created by these rivers, by their spring snowmelt expansion where the water runs up into the banks and gives everything a big drink of water, that pattern can get interrupted when we're holding water back behind dams. There's non-native trees that have taken over, there's degradation of habitat, to the point where in some parts of the basin, I would say largely in the lower Colorado River Basin, that natural system has been so interrupted, we even think of the river as not really having those riverine characteristics anymore, and rather just being a series of reservoirs working their way from northern Arizona down to the border with Mexico.
And here at the upper part, you know, we replicate what beavers used to do.
I'd say another, big change on the landscape, the disappearance of most of our natural wetlands.
It's the wetlands and the irrigation that we produce is where their habitat is.
In fact, the surrogate wetlands being created by irrigated agriculture taking on an outsized importance, particularly for birds that depends on them for forage.
Birds vote with their wings. The Colorado River is the pathway from Canada to Mexico of a critically important part of our biodiversity, right?
As we're incentivizing farmers to use less water on their land, we don't want to lose all of that habitat.
And I think as it relates to taking water away from agriculture, the unintended consequences are so enormous that we're going to have to learn that.
In fact, we have dozens of endangered species on the Colorado River because of that change in habitat.
You know, what are the canaries in the mine that tell us, the system is breaking down?
The next increment of water that any city thinks it needs to grow is probably most easily and inexpensively gained through conservation efforts within their existing supply, rather than going to build some new pipeline to pull yet more water out of the environment.
The Las Vegas example of how they went from 135 gallons per person per day down to 35 gallons per person per day is an enormous story.
You had a Vegas with decorative fountains, decorative ponds, basically small lakes. And those things have all largely disappeared. If you're a housing developer now, you cannot build homes with lawns.
We need to invest throughout our state, throughout the West, conservation at every turn.
In the Colorado Basin in 2003, California had to permanently reduce its use by 20% of its take from the Colorado River. About 10% of our demands today are met with recycled water. We're looking at developing the largest recycling project in the nation, known as Pure Water Southern California, that would produce 180,000 acre feet, which is about 20% of the amount of water we're getting from the Colorado River Aqueduct today. And then the final piece to that puzzle, of course, is aggressive water conservation, providing incentives for low-flow shower heads, low-flow toilets, and most recently we've been focusing on outdoor water use by providing incentives for turf replacement programs.
The Southern Nevada Water Authority, or SNWA, is actively pursuing those tracts of grass. They are paying people to remove them.
We elect in the West, and I do it myself, we elect water to be used on landscaping, for example, in ways that I think in the future we'll question and we'll move away from.
Except for public use and some active areas, it'd be really hard to justify taking farms out of production when people still irrigate their landscape.
We also developed a program with Palo Verde Irrigation District where we pay farmers on a rotating basis to fallow a portion of their land. Not permanent land retirement, but rotating fallowing. The amount of water that we fallow each year depends on our needs here in Southern California, and we can ramp that fallowing up and down based on our needs.
For 15 years, our valley had a pretty intense fallowing program. It put a lot of people out of business, seed companies, fertilizer companies, refrigeration, cooler systems, trucking, transportation, harvest.
We also have a program with Bard Water District down across from Yuma in Southeast California, where we pay farmers to skip their summer planting of low-value, high-water use crops and focus on the vegetables, which provides most of the economic value to that region, but using a lot less water.
People grow certain crops in certain areas for a whole variety of reasons: soils, water, climate, even things that may not be so apparent, like markets or transportation or knowledge or labor.
Going forward, the Imperial Irrigation District and its farmers have really embraced the idea of on-farm conservation. So being more innovative and using investment to use less water and grow more crops.
No-till drills are a wonderful illustration of that piece of farm equipment that can be purchased through maybe the proceeds from a conserved water program that really help the entire cycle. No-till drilling and having cover crops means that you don't have that evaporation, your yields go up, and your soil health gets better. Those innovations are much more likely to occur if they are financed, if people have the money to adopt them and make the transition to regenerative practices and away from conventional carbon emitting practices.
You can't ask a farmer just to go grow a new crop. You need to support them. You need to help them find, new markets, new storage, new technologies that might help them with this crop.
The Israelis have done some profound things with water conservation with drip irrigation, and it's impressive. It takes infrastructure.
Drip is a one-year proposition. You're going to be doing it every year. That's over $1,000 an acre.
An individual farmer can't afford to make that kind of conversion.
Just to buy sprinklers, for instance, is over $2,000 an acre.
We did things like line ditches, put in sprinkler systems, pump back systems so they could take less water from the river, but still grow all the crops that they had been historically growing.
When you look at the amount of water that Las Vegas alone recycles and reuses, when you see even Los Angeles and San Diego These cities have been criticized for decades, as water wasters. But when you look at the per capita usage, they're much less than farms throughout the basin.
Phoenix and Tucson and the Central Arizona Project in Arizona, they put water in years when they have it underground, and they manage it conjunctively with their surface water use. Same thing happens in Southern California. Orange County is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, groundwater recharging districts in the nation or in the world.
Here in Southern California, because we're so close to the ocean, our wastewater flows into the ocean and there's no other downstream user. So instead of having it go to the ocean, we capture it, clean it up, and use it on golf courses, groundwater recharge.
The beauty about storing water underground is you don't lose it to evaporation. We lose millions of acre feet of water when we store it in surface reservoirs conventionally, like we have in Lake Powell, Lake Mead.
By using innovation, I think that we can solve these problems.
We have the technology right now to take your master bath shower water in your house, treat it to a near drinking water quality standard, and then you flush your toilets with that water instead of with clean drinking water. We shouldn't have any new construction in the Colorado River Basin that doesn't have that's not plumbed for that type of technology.
The situation in Las Vegas was one where the shortage was coming, it was irrefutable, and there was no way forward unless they conserved.
We also need to be managing that watershed more carefully and with more of our resources put into the care of this place that provides water for us.
Indian folks have been using that term when they talk about water use, that we have to be humble. We have to recognize what we can control, determine, manage, and what we actually have to say we'll have to back off on our demands here and have to be humble.
We think of the land as our home, and everything within that system of land, water, elements, the animals, the birds, everything's all within the place. And our connection and our identities are with all of that.
So if we want to replicate what the tribes did in stewarding the land and the water, we've got to learn from them. And we're going to have to invite those voices to the table and see if we can maybe have to unlearn some of the stuff that we thought we had taught ourselves about water management in the West.
Ownership of land, ownership of what people would regard as property was something we didn't know about. We moved according to how resources were available to us. So when treaties were established with a lot of tribes, water was not within those treaties.
Well, they had one sentence about tribes and then they forgot. We don't have to do that. Tribes are in the conversation.
As sovereign nations, we should be at the level of conversation that Mexico is. We should be ahead of states. We should be ahead of municipalities and counties.
Even with, a 40% decline, a 9 million acre foot river, there's enough water there, but we just need to have a really different relationship with it and use far less of it.
2007, we developed the shortage guidelines, and it was 15 years before we had a shortage. The models at the time said we would have been in this dire situation much sooner, but we worked together.
If we want to continue having this autonomy as states, then we need to do stuff that will, protect each other. Otherwise, as history shows, when states are unable to get along, the federal government comes in.
And the risk is that instead of leaning into collaboration and cooperation at this time, that people go back into their corners and rely on what they think is a legal principle that gives them the right to not have to give when other people do. And at that point, we're handing decisions about management of this basin, which is enormous and enormously important and enormously complex. We're handing that over to a judge somewhere who can't possibly have more wisdom than all of these jurisdictions leaning in together to apply their collective wisdom.
Litigation is also very costly It, I think, damages relationships that are so critical in working on this river.
But my greatest fear is that that's the direction that we head.
I've seen it, the states come together before, but I think I haven't seen the times really as extreme as we're seeing right now.
We're in a slightly different place now with significant reductions in demand anticipated, and I think everyone recognizes that we cannot fail.
This is our choice. Will posterity say a system of getting collaborative decision-making geared up and operating that worked for decades? And then those people in the 2020s, those people in the 7 basin states, they wouldn't play anymore.
We're going to have to decide the West that we want, or we're going to get the West that we deserve.
So the four-way test is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendship? And will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Those 4 questions ask human beings to do what they are perfectly capable of doing, to think of their own interests. Yes, absolutely, think of your own interests, and then think of the interests of other people.
What is coming at me from these other sides that I need to open up to and rethink? Not that you have to agree with everybody on the other side.
If we use that four-way test, we have the ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes.
We can get to the place where we rethink what we think. Is the data I'm thinking about appropriate? Is it accurate? Is it true? What can I learn from others in the area?
And then get to the next stage of saying, I can get something significant of what I want if I am attentive to what other people want.
In the past, negotiations have been done both on a political basis and on an engineering hydrology basis. Politicians then make decisions on who gets what. Nowhere in that negotiation are they asking, is it the truth? Is it beneficial to everyone? And that, I think, is critical to make sure that this is a living compact, that we have something that goes on into the future and everybody benefits from it in the future as well.
Rotary made the difference with polio. There's no question that polio is much reduced on the planet. It's not completely gone, but it is much reduced because Rotarians did that.
And if we can do it here in the Colorado River Basin among the 7 states, the native tribes, and all the users, that has an unbelievable ability to show the world how to do that.
So I've been a Rotarian for over a decade, working in Burundi, East Africa, an international project. Rotary has come together across many countries, and in the U.S. in particular. We can do the same here with the Colorado River Project.
We can make choices about that river, about accepting the reality that we are all going to have to give up a few comforts.
We need to come together, boots on the ground, and as we do with these international projects, reach down and find a way forward to make a solution.
Form a club committee on the Colorado River. Form a district committee on the Colorado River. Become involved with your state legislature who are going to make decisions based on what your water commissioner does at the 7th state compact negotiations. Understand that this is all going to go to Congress, and so you need to know your representatives in Congress as well, because they'll ratify this compact.
Every time during the day when you notice that you are in relationship to water, turn that into saying something to a fellow citizen. We can make a difference.
Be somebody that you can be proud of, and you're going to protect the future generations that we all want to help into the future have a reliable water source for the 7 states.
If I had a magic wand, it would be to have everyone who is a Colorado River water user, and that includes all the residents who find Colorado River in their taps when they pour a glass of water or take a shower, understand better where their water comes from, and understand that at this moment it is imperative that we all become better water stewards and better river stewards.